Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
Today's warehouse needs to keep inventory moving smoothly and quickly. Meet these challenges with on-demand warehouse labeling from Brother Mobile Solutions. Our mobile and industrial printers will help optimize your operations to achieve the speed, reliability, and durability your warehouse needs. With easy integration for existing warehouse technology, convenient portability, and upfront affordability, Brother Mobile Solutions is at your side when it comes to warehouse labeling. Try one for free today by visiting brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse or click the link in the show notes. That's brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse to try one for free today.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by two guests from JLC Robotics, Jamie Callihan, he is the president over there, and Phil Denton, he is the channel sales manager. And we're going to talk a little bit about JLC Robotics, what it is that they do. We're also going to talk a little bit about the AMR AGV market, some of the challenges there, what's going on in the space right now, and then also a little bit about JLC's offerings in Thouzer and CaPow. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later and what those two are. But Phil and Jamie, welcome to the show. How are both of you guys?
Thank you, Kevin. Good here. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and the people who listen to the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. Another wonderful Monday morning.
Yeah, definitely. Start of the week, right? So very good to have both of you on, and definitely, very interested in talking about all things AMR, AGV here and JLC Robotics in general. So Jamie, why don't you give us kind of a little overview of JLC Robotics, which is kind of, I think, evolved out of JLC Industrial, the other company as well. So tell us a little bit about what it is, the robotics side, and then also kind of that evolution too.
Yeah. So the JLC Robotics side currently consists of the Thouzer, which is a robotic cart with an API, and CaPow is the offering that charges AMRs, AGVs in motion or offering perpetual power. And JLC Robotics did evolve from the industrial side. The industrial side was more of a solutions-based company where we did a lot of work in automotive, but also manufacturing in regard to getting the parts sequenced, getting them the parts material handled to the line, getting them assembled, quality control checked, and then out the door. So some kind of process in there, very rarely all of them. Did a lot of work starting in 2015 with Toyota Motor Corporation here in North America, including Mexico, lift assist and effectors, line side workstations, and again, a lot of sequencing and material handling to help them get the vehicles out the door. It was all assembly of the vehicles, some in the powertrain plants as well. So last year in early 2022, I was approached by Doug from Japan, who had said, we have this cool AMR AGV robotic cart and it's different and all of these things. So started to look into it. And since it's in Toyota, Nissan, Denso, a lot of big Japanese companies, I asked my Toyota guys to check into it for me. And so they did that, came back and said, hey, it's great. We think it's going to do well in the States.
Yeah.
But then it came time to write a pretty big check to get into this. And so I need more than that. And talked with a guy in Japan who had them for about 5 years. He said, the only thing I've changed out's a battery. If I can find more use cases, I'll buy more. And I know how diligent Toyota is. So we went ahead and took the plunge, and happy we did so.
All right. Very interesting. And it's great to see, good solutions like that being brought globally and coming into the different markets as well. And it's great that you can kind of facilitate that a little bit. So, before we kind of dive further into those offerings themselves, maybe let's get a perspective here on kind of what's going on in that AMR/AGV market currently. So maybe Phil can dive into that a little bit, as he's out there, the sales guy, and I'm sure is very in touch with the market and talking to people on what they're looking for or what solutions they're actually utilizing. So tell us a little bit, Phil, kind of what's going on in that market currently.
Sure. So first off, I would say that if you go to any of the large trade shows, it is almost overwhelming how much choice customers have these days. There's the guys with Hawaiian shirts in their booth, right? Usually front and center. I'm not going to name anybody, but there's many, 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 many robots out there. And I feel like from a customer perspective, just put myself in their shoes. I have to imagine it's really challenging to figure out, hey, what's the right robot for me? Because these all have 4 to 6 wheels. They all have, they all look like they move pallets, or they all look like they have lifters, or, they all say they have the best web interface, or they have the easiest setup, or whatever the case may be. But there's so much, choice out there. I feel like it's hard for customers to end up in the right scenario, because I have a hard time even inside the industry differentiating between a lot of the other offerings out there and what makes a good fit for one particular application.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so true. I remember walking into ProMat earlier this year and just thinking like, Jesus, like there's just so many options here. Like if I'm somebody that's looking for a solution, like I feel like it's like, where do I even begin? Right. There's so much cool stuff to see, but then like you said, what actually is the right fit? So I'm curious from your perspective, like when people are looking for a solution, what are some of the most common challenges or problems that they're trying to solve for right now?
I would say the clear and obvious one is labor, right? Because it used to be that automation was a way to save money by cutting headcount these days, right? But I would say that just about every facility that Jamie and I visit, there's usually a sign, sometimes as large as a tractor trailer completely covered in paint, that says, now hiring all shifts, $19 an hour, whatever the case may be. So nowadays, I think companies are automating more out of necessity just to keep up with production demand. We know the economy's been a little shaky lately. Tech sector layoffs keep happening. Venture capital is slowing in several different industries. I just read an article this morning about how, all these venture failures in the trucking industry, right? It's like automated trucking, like 18-wheelers and that tractor trailers kind of thing. 10 companies have gone belly up in the past 2 years. But still, I think the demand for AGVs and AMRs is always going to be there, at least for the next 5 or so years, because for whatever reason, there just aren't people out there willing to work. So I think the material handling automation market's going to stay in double digits. I know it's getting tougher, but we're still not seeing much slowdown in demand, especially as we go into holiday season. Companies are starting to hit crunch time, and they're really, really starting to feel it this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's such a great point. The labor is certainly an absolute struggle within the warehousing industry, and in my area here too. I see all the signs that you mentioned as well. It's a little crazy, some of the offerings that are out there with like bonuses, sign-on bonuses, and all these things just to try and get people in the door. So, for that, obviously a lot of companies are struggling with that, and people, like you said, have lots and lots of options at this point. So, if somebody put myself in my shoes and going into ProMat and say like, wow, there's just so many options here. Where do I even begin? What do I look at first to try and, start this automation journey? What's the advice or what's the direction that you would give somebody that's just looking to start to bring in some automation into their operation?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains. how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
I would say it's almost unfortunate, but I would say that if there are any type of, I know there are trade groups out there, right? Mm-hmm. Like A3 is a big one, but I would say to look for peer groups, right? And this is not to put down any of our robotic colleagues out there, but I mean, there's so many applications that are similar, right? It's like, hey, I need to move pallets that weigh 1,300 pounds. Like, well, there's a lot of robots at the same show that can move that pallet back and forth all day long, right? Mm-hmm. But just the sheer amount of time it takes. We're currently working with a company actually that was looking at a particular brand of AGV. An initial testing looked good, but then after they got a demo unit, got their hands on it, started working with it for a while, they found out that they were not able to control the maximum rate of acceleration and deceleration. So when they were moving pallets of goods that were not yet shrink wrapped, they couldn't turn down the acceleration speed to keep stuff from falling off the pallet.
Oh.
So this was a well-known brand that we both walked past at ProMat, right? And I'm not going to name names here, but little details like that seem pretty critical for a lot of operations, and they don't tell you at the booth that, hey, that's not a feature yet, right? So it's unfortunate, but again, that particular customer got far enough down the process where they somehow got their hands on a demo unit. I don't know if that was a loaner or money exchanged hands, but I feel like everyone out there is selling the moon these days, and it's not until you really get your hands on the unit and get it in your facility and really put it through its paces that you find out what the real shortcomings are. So for that reason, again, I think it's important for customers to find peer groups or trade groups or companies that can kind of help them save time from making the same mistakes, or, well, hey, Mr. Joe Blow at a similar company doing what I do, but in a different area. Like, what are you seeing? And, I've got this problem. What have you seen work for you guys? Because again, everything looks great at the trade show and it works flawlessly in those demo booths. But then when you get in the facility and start running around, that's when you start really getting to know the product. So just to save the discovery time, I would feel like finding peer groups is really, really critical these days, because there's so much information overload and everyone says they can do everything, but that's really just not the case.
Yeah, I think that's such a great call out and such a great point there. I mean, to be able to connect with people that are potentially have already tried the solution or are utilizing the solution already. I mean, those small things, like you said, that, it can decelerate it at the right level to prevent stuff from falling off the pallet. I mean, it seems, maybe minuscule in the grand scheme of things, but that ends up being a huge problem, right? When that's, the way that you need to move stuff at certain points within your processes. And, you want to bring in these solutions to help you move those processes that, work, go faster. You don't want to have to reinvent your entire operation just because, the robot can't go at the right speed to protect your product. So I think that's a really, really good call out there. And I think too, I mean, why don't you point out too, I mean, there's a difference between the AMR and the AGV, and where are we in terms of, like, obviously the AMRs, are becoming more and more prevalent, I think, than the AGV itself. But, where are we in terms of that kind of contrast there? And maybe talk to a little bit, when would a consumer want to look at an AMR versus an AGV type solution?
That's a great question. So first off, for the listeners out there who aren't acutely aware of the difference, so an automated guided vehicle, or an AGV, is always going to follow a predefined fixed path. It will never reroute itself. It will never make independent decisions on its own. It goes where you tell it to, and it will not stray ever. That technology has been around for 70 years. It started with copper lines in the ceiling, and then they later put them on the floor, buried them in the floor, where robots were following guide wires around the facility. Nowadays, there's different ways to accomplish the same goal. You can still do the wires. You can do magnetic tape. You can do retroreflective paint. You can do tape. You can do all sorts of different things. But basically, you're putting a path on the floor that the robot follows. And some robots can follow things more intelligently than others. You can do put little signs along the way, kind of like a train sign to make it go left, go right, speed up, slow down, pick up something, drop something. So you can put some intelligence in there. An AMR, on the other hand, an autonomous mobile robot is fairly intelligent. It usually needs to tie into a piece of software called a fleet manager to kind of do centralized control to manage the tasking of the robots, the charging of the robots, and keeping everything running optimally and make sure the missions are getting accomplished in an amount of time. But the big difference is an automated guided vehicle, if there's an obstruction in its path, typically an AGV will just sit there and wait for the obstruction to clear and then continue on its way. An AMR, on the other hand, because it typically knows what the entire facility looks like, it knows the layout of the whole facility, will do its best to route around an obstruction. So it can always find the shortest path from A to B, whereas an AGV is always going to stick to that predefined path and that route that you taught it to go. So that's the main difference between the two technologies. And I'll say that the most recent studies I saw, there's still double-digit demand growth for both. But I would say that even talking to a larger customer working with these days, the demand is going to trend towards AMRs over time, I think. I don't think the AGVs will ever completely go away because there are cases where when you just want to move something from A to B and you want it to be simple, you don't want to have a bunch of setup time. You don't want to have to hook it into a fleet manager. You don't want to have wireless connectivity and software and programmers and all the complexity that comes with it. I still think there's opportunity for AGVs today. But as time goes on, ultimately, I mean, as the AMRs software collectively gets better and better, the setup time is going to get less and less. The intelligence is going to grow and grow. They're going to get smarter and smarter and require less setup, less programming, less maintenance. It's going to be able to run more intelligently overall. I think as time goes on, the age of the AGV will probably wane as AMRs take over completely. That I don't know that it will ever completely disappear, but I think that transition will be happening for sure.
Very interesting, and I think it's interesting to see too. I mean, like you said, the AGV technology has been around for so long, but now we see this AMR, which is bringing like I think a little more flexibility, right, in terms of that. And like you said, it can navigate different paths, and but it has to have that software behind it. And I think a lot of times the AMR side is, the hardware is only as good as the software that's kind of behind it and driving that, right? So I think it's pretty interesting. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about and this is for Phil or Jamie, I mean, from an implementation perspective, when we look at AMR versus AGV or just the overall automation implementation itself, I mean, tell us about what does implementation kind of look like right now, and what are some challenges for customers or potential customers when they're looking at implementing automation into their operation?
Well, I'll take one quick point if you don't mind. It's kind of a transition from your last question. So one interesting thing happening in the market these days, I think there's actually an emerging standard coming out of Germany called VDA 50/50. And we're starting to hear this from our larger customers, but this is basically larger companies are wanting more choice in their choice of automation products, right? And this is true not only in our world in the rolling robot side of things, but also in the traditional PLC side of things, right? Traditionally, Rockwell Automation, Allen Bradley ecosystem has been a closed ecosystem, right? They wanted you to use FactoryTalk and they wanted to use their software, their hardware, and their connectors and all their stuff. You did not play well with ABB or Siemens or other controls type things, right? You had to have your little silos of things separated out. Well, now companies want to say, well, hey, I like these AMRs for this function and I like those AMRs for that function, but I want to be able to see them all at the same time. Or what happens if I have two sets of AMRs that show up at an intersection at the same time, but they're running on different fleet managers because they're different brands? Who's going to go first? Or how are we going to navigate around when they're not aware of each other? So VDA 50/50, the standard being developed out of Germany, is supposed to be a way to make all of AMRs and AGVs as well talk together, right? So that way a customer could say, well, I like several different brands of AMRs. I want to have a heterogeneous environment where everything talks together and plays nicely together. So we're starting to get asked about this now. And I feel like, the way I've seen things go from my past in IT towards the way I've seen things go in more industrial automation, again, traditional automation type cells, not rolling automation, but now moving to robotics, is customers don't want to get vendor lock-in, right? They want to be able to pick, hey, this is the best fleet manager, but this is the best robot, and this is the best whatever else. And we'll be able to mix and match best of breed solutions and not be stuck in a vendor lock-in, with a single vendor, kind of thing. So I think that I think anybody who's compliant with that standard and gives their customers choice in the future is going to be a front runner, or at least on a system integration side, a company that can understand bringing choices to your customer and options to your customer and letting them kind of pick and choose the pieces that are going to solve their problem best. So I think implementation hurdle wise, I think that interoperability is going to be a bigger and bigger deal these days. Because like you said, the hardware and software are separate these days. I mean, there's companies like Robotics out there out of Europe, and they make autonomous navigation technology where you could bolt that onto any hardware you want and turn that into a Robotics robot, right? So if you liked robot A, but you didn't like the software, you could take the brain out, put the Robotics brain in there, and then have your hardware and software too. So it's, I think there's a lot of players entering the market all the time. There's consolidation all the time, but I think you're right in that ultimately I think it's the software and the usability of it that's going to end up winning in the end, because hardware is going to become less and less important nowadays. It's going to be the software and the user experience that wins out in the end. Yeah,
definitely. I think that's so important and so key. I mean, the vehicle matters, I guess, and what it can do from a physical aspect, but what's driving behind it and intelligently, I think makes sense. And I like that you mentioned take the brain out of the robot and put in the new one, kind of a robot lobotomy there. But very interesting. So
robotomy.
Robotomy. I like that. Okay. We got a new phrase here. So Jamie, what do you think? What are your thoughts there?
With the implementation, I think I'd go back to one of the first things that we talked about, and that is when a customer goes and looks at this ocean of automation and everyone wanting to sell them their wares, right? How do they differ and all those types of things? And I think that the customers need to do a self-examination first to figure out how much horsepower do they have? And if they don't have it, how far are they willing to go? Because as Phil mentioned earlier, a lot of AMRs, you need a fleet manager. And it's great if it works on the demo showroom floor, but then when they hand it off to the customer and the customer does not have a fleet manager or someone that really knows what they're doing, we've seen even some of the smartest robots still get gridlocked because they're smart, but they're still dumb robots. Yeah. So I would say with the implementation is again, letting them do a self-examination, especially if they're just dipping their toe in. Don't go, from 0 to 100 miles an hour. And like Phil said, peer groups, I would recommend they also try and find other companies that aren't, necessarily competitive, that they'll let them come in their doors and ask them the questions that they have and see the technology in their plant. I think that would be a good use of their time for implementing these things, because even some of the OEMs, Japanese OEM companies that we deal with, they have a lot of horsepower. So when they have a problem, they can send out 1 or 2 or 5 engineers sometimes to take care of it. But a lot of warehouse type companies or tier 1, 2, 3s don't have that. So I think they need to consider that before implementing anything.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point too, about understanding like what resources do you have like internally to be able to take on something like this? Because it's, you may have, I've certainly fought this battle in my past as well, as a warehouse manager, like, it's a great solution. This could solve like this process for us and make it so much better. And then, you bring it to the table and then IT's like, well, we can't handle that. Like we can't figure that out. Right. So, I mean, having that understanding of like, okay, what can we do? And if we need to do this, like, what do we have to put in place, not only from a operational flow perspective, maybe infrastructure perspective, but from that resource staffing perspective on the technical side too, is like, how do we handle that? Right. I think that's such a good point. So really interesting discussion here on the AMR, AGV market and kind of implementation from that side. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the two solutions you guys are offering through JLC, which is the Thouzer robotic cart you mentioned there a little bit in the beginning, Jamie, and then this CaPow power solution as well. So tell us, I guess let's talk about Thouzer first and tell us a little bit about the solution and what it is really.
Yeah, so I'll handle the Thouzer and then I'll punt it over to Phil and he can handle CaPow. Okay. The Thouzer by Doog is a Japanese made, we call it a robotic cart with an API. It's a cross between an AMR and an AGV. So to Phil's point, it is not a true AMR because if it's in memory mode or memory trace or line trace, what we call that, and there's a box or someone standing in the way, it's just going to stop. It's not going to reroute. So it does not have the brain power to be able to do that. So we make sure our customers know that. We ask them, what they're looking for. Where this really shines is since it's so easy to use, the layman on the floor can actually use this. We've had Phil's son over. He's 8 years old, and in a matter of minutes, he's using this. So what we're looking for is simple A to B movement, where we can carry something on top and or tow something behind. So we really shine if people are pushing and pulling carts, and we're taking that away from the team member, or we can add 2 or 3 carts behind it and pull them, and then the ROI goes up really well. So the pick pack operations, people putting items on this cart or dolly and hitting a button and sending the unit off while they can stay in the pick pack area, that helps teams with the labor issue. But the unit itself is very simple to use. It can carry and it can tow, which differentiates itself in the marketplace. And then the flexibility of charging operations, being able to customize the unit. But it's got a unique position in the marketplace. As we talked about, a lot of the slam robots, which are simultaneous layering and mapping, where you get it out of the box, you map your area, you set your routes, you set your go-nos. Those are pretty much fully autonomous, right? They're gonna come up under a pallet, they're gonna pick it up, they're gonna take it somewhere, drop it off, and do that again all day long. We're different. We don't do that. We could do some of that, but that's not really what we're looking for. We're looking for simple A to B to keep weight and ergonomics away from the human, to keep the operators and team members in a specific area, and taking away carrying and pulling in long distances, things like that.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really interesting, kind of how it's almost like a hybrid in a sense between the AMR AGV, where you said, has the memory mode, but then it also has, like you said, you can utilize it as an AMR as well. And I saw that it has kind of a follow mode as well. Tell us a little bit about how that works. Yeah,
being on the spot, I didn't explain that very well, so my apologies. But yes, so we have 3 functions. One is follow me, where you can simply push a button and the unit will follow you around, and it's really cool, but it doesn't create a lot of value unless there's a lot of heavy parts or something like that a team member is carrying. It can alleviate that. What you can do with that function, though, is hit a record button on the app or on the unit, have it follow you around, and you can teach it pauses, you can teach it stops, things of that nature, so you can set your route. You get it back to a known starting point, and then you can hit the route that you just recorded. You can hit the play button, and it will run that route exactly how you taught it. So it's much more simple to teach a route with this unit than it is a slam robot. And that's back to talking to customers. If they've got a lot of horsepower and a lot of engineers, they may say that's too simple for us. And other people may go, oh, I love it. If anything changes, they can make those changes. So call us back in or anyone else back in. They can do it themselves.
Yeah, I think that's such a great thing. I mean, it's so easy, I guess, in a sense. Like I can see it, from the perspective of that supervisor or manager that's on the floor saying like, oh, like, we got this special project or something, like, so let's just train this thing real quick to run the path, I think, which is so much easier than, having to, reach out to IT or the integrator or something and say like, oh, how can we recreate this path or create this thing that's probably not going to get done as quickly as you would like it to. So I think that's a really interesting feature there. So really interesting about the Thouzer and definitely an interesting concept and very cool to see the video. I looked it up as well there. So let's talk a little bit about CaPow. We'll say that's kind of the final punch of the conversation, the CaPow here at the end. But Phil, why don't you tell us a little bit about CaPow and what it is?
So CaPow is a perpetual power solution for mobile robots. And like I said before, AGVs and AMRs alike are growing a lot, and that's not going to change anytime soon. We're talking to companies these days who are looking at robots for the first time. So, on one hand, you can go on LinkedIn and hear stories of companies that have hundreds or even thousands of robots, or, like Amazon, tens of thousands of robots or more. But there's companies that are just starting their automation journey, right? So there's a ton of opportunity out there. But CaPow is really interesting because one of the biggest challenges with the robots is keeping them working, right? Because the robot's really only working for you if it's picking something up, moving it, or putting it down. Anything aside from that is overhead, right? And overhead typically comes from cleaning, lubrication, inspection, maintenance, and charging. Charging is by far the largest source of downtime for mobile robots these days.
Right.
So the whole reason CaPow was invented was to eliminate downtime due to charging. And in certain cases, I mean, we're seeing anywhere from 15 to 30% of a robot's time is spent charging. We looked at a customer recently, and they have a fleet of, I think, 50 robots, and they're more or less divided into pods of 5. And only about 30% of the time are all 5 robots actually working. More often than not, one of the 5 robots is always charging while the other 4 work. So if you think of it this way, 20% of your robot fleet is charging all the time, which means 20% of your fleet's not working. So CaPow overcomes that by being able to provide power to the robots as they move to keep them charging all the time, to keep them working all the time. So now if you have a work cell where you really only need 4 robots to accomplish the work, you can buy 4 robots to accomplish that task rather than having to buy 4 plus an extra for the charging, right? So in terms of robot fleet sizing, CaPow represents a huge, huge savings to manufacturers. I mean, it's a huge savings. So that's, I mean, it's a really, really exciting solution, honestly, mainly for that reason. There are ancillary benefits as well, but to allow customers to be able to right size their robot fleets in a time when everybody's spending money on robots is actually really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's such a huge thing. I mean, especially as you said, like you look at just the cost of the robots themselves. And like you said, you're able to, instead of having that extra one to make sure you're having that rotation from the charger and having enough active all the time, then you can just cut that cost initially. So I'm curious, I mean, what does it look like, the solution? I mean, how does that kind of look, and how does it go in place and things like that?
So it's pretty slick. So there's basically 2 main components. So there's a power transmitter and antenna, and the transmitter antenna gets placed on the floor. It kind of looks like a little short panel, depending on the height, the customer requirements, but it sits on the floor. And then there's a receiver that goes onto the robot. And basically, whenever the robot rolls over the transmitter, power is delivered wirelessly across the connection, across the air is wireless in between.
Interesting.
Yeah, so you can do static or dynamic charging, right? So you can do opportunistic charging when the robot's sitting still, but if we need to put other chargers out there so it charges while it rolls along the floor on designated paths, that's fine too. So our whole goal is to eliminate the downtime due to charging. So we have a tool we use called the floor planner tool, where we kind of take a look at what the customer's process flow looks like and where their robots are spending time, where we might be able to place chargers, where we can't place chargers, and we'll use that to design the optimal layout. But again, the whole goal is to outfit the robots with enough power that they never have to stop to charge. Again, that's the goal, is to eliminate that downtime due to charging.
Very interesting. Yeah. I mean, very cool, and definitely a great solution to be able to do that. And I think it's really interesting to see, how, so much we talk about the robot itself, but then there's a lot of cool technology happening around that robot to make it better. Just like, I guess, we see technology, helping to make people better and the way they operate and more efficient, at the same time, we're looking at that from a robotic perspective too. So really interesting solutions, definitely. And definitely very interesting to talk to you guys about JLC and just kind of the market in general. Very insightful. So definitely appreciate you guys coming on and talking to me, both Jamie and Phil. If people are interested in learning more about JLC Robotics or interested in learning more about specifically the Thouzer and CaPow, what's the best way to get in touch with you guys or find out more information?
I would say our website, jlcrobotics.com. We also have a YouTube channel under JLC Robotics where you can actually see items in motion, and as well as LinkedIn. And I've seen that you have connections when you put your podcast out where people can connect with us on LinkedIn, which would be great.
All right, great. So we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well, so people can easily find it. So Phil and Jamie, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to me today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.